Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and it's time for part 2 of the Q&A, so let's go ahead and knock this out. Alright, first question. Jason, how can I get my squat mobility up? Currently, I'm having a hard time staying stable on my heels, which makes all the weight go to my toes, and that in turn puts way too much stress on my calves and feet. Alright, Western Spyro detected there. Alright, bro, as a good Slav, you shouldn't have this problem. But joking aside, do not put plates under your heels. That guy, ignore him. That's the stupidest advice you'll ever see. That's bodybuilding nonsense. If you need an elevated heel, go buy weightlifting shoes. Now, is that something you should consider? Yes, something you should consider. But here's the other thing. You might need to actually address your squat form, because if you're having that sort of forward lean, that's actually indicative of a true good morning squat. In other words, if you're getting down to the bottom and your torso is leaning so far forward that it's pulling it forward that way that you're going onto your toes, that's a technique issue. Right? That's a technique issue. You're going to have to learn how to, again, get yourself in the correct positions. Now, you could practice some third world squats. Right, you could practice some third world squats. Look that up. You could practice squatting to a box. You could practice stretching yourself by putting a lighter weight on a bar, like maybe 50% of your max, putting it on a bar, getting it kind of tight and everything, sitting back and letting it stretch you at the bottom, and work on some of those things. Those are different techniques that you can utilize to help with that mobility. But the fact of the matter is, if you're actually going onto your toes like that on a squat, that is an issue of everything from possible core stability to just flat out bad squat form, right? There's a lot going on there. And those are all things that you need to look at. So, I mean, without even looking at your squat and seeing what's going on, there's a whole host of problems there, because that should never happen, even with a mobility concern. But the first thing I would check and see is, can you actually do a third world squat? Can you squat to a box that's an inch below parallel and sit down onto it with any weight on your back? So that's the other thing to factor in too. If you are physically capable of doing any of those things, or say squatting to a box and keeping the bar mid-foot while doing it, it's not a mobility issue. It's either going to be a core strength issue, or it's just going to be flat bad form. Right, that's usually what you're dealing with, because usually if you go onto your toes, that is an actual good morning squat. That's usually what happens when you good morning a weight that's even moderately heavy. So there's a lot more going on here than potential mobility, and without really seeing it and you testing some of these things, it's hard to tell. All right, next question. Is an increase in intensity but a decrease in reps and therefore total tonnage seen as a regression? Or is this sometimes necessary in order to build up to a new weight and tonnage? All right, this is where we get into some very, very complex discussion regarding tension versus workload. All right, when we talk about workload being important for hypertrophy, that doesn't mean that workload is all that matters. In other words, I could add tonnage to you indefinitely by adding sets. All right? Tonnage is a general guideline to understand volume. It's a general guideline to understand volume. But if I just added another set every single week with the same weight and reps, that would be more and more tonnage. Do you think you would grow that way forever? No. What you have to remember is that irrespective of what some of these guys in certain circles are saying about training volume, tension is still one of the primary factors of muscle growth. Right, it's still one of the primary factors. And what I mean is, if you can do on the bench press, right, 3 sets of 10 with 300 pounds, that's the same tonnage as 9 sets of 10 with only 100 pounds. Which one of those do you think is going to make you grow more? So when you look at it from that perspective, you have to understand tension matters. Tension matters. And as long as volume is sufficient to stimulate growth, any increase in tension has a hypertrophic effect. Okay? That's what we need to understand. So if you increase weight on the bar, but you go below the minimum volume you need to stimulate adaptation, okay, that could be seen as a regression. But it's not a regression in strength or hypertrophy, it's a regression in your training loads. Right? So if you add weight to the bar and you cut down and you're only able to do 1 set of 5 with it, and it's not a deadlift, then that's a regression. But if you add weight and reduce workload, so you've increased intensity and you reduce workload, but you've increased tension while hitting the minimum training volume you need to stimulate growth, you're going to grow from it. You're going to have a hypertrophic effect, and you're going to have an improved training effect in terms of neuromuscular efficiency, right? Because you've trained the motor pattern with a heavier weight. So you have to understand these differences. If you get caught up in the idea that tonnage and training volume is the single most important factor or the only factor in muscle growth, then sure, I could see why you would see it that way. But it's not that simple. It really isn't that simple. Tension and volume both matter. They both matter. They're both relevant factors for stimulating growth. So at different points, you could trade one for the other, and as long as something is increasing, you're probably going to grow. But the same thing, junk volume, which is what a lot of some of the evidence-based guys are promoting it. I don't want to get into their motivations right now. There's a lot to that. A lot of it has to do with some of them are just weak and lazy. And they're looking for biohacks. But if you get caught into that idea, then I could see why you would think that's the case. Oh, the tonnage went down. But it's not going to not cause you to grow. If the volume is high enough to stimulate an adaptation still, and you increase weight on the bar. Okay? And we play with these variables to ensure continual progress. That's what's happening. We're playing with these variables to ensure continual progress. But your tonnage is going to go up and down, just like your weights on the bar are going to go up and down in different phases. We're looking for a general progression and increase. All right, next question. Coath, you listed your favorite supps recently were creatine, mag, vitamin D. Is fish oil out following that meta-study earlier this year? I take a few high-strength caps a day because my budget doesn't allow for much seafood. There are still some benefits for inflammation, even though the heart disease is iffy. Look, fish oil is one of those that I would say still has some potential use, right? And I may rotate it back in. I just haven't felt like it. In fact, I've been thinking about it lately. Now that you bring the question up, and yes, this Q&A actually won't be up till next week. But since you bring the question up, yeah, I've absolutely considered it, right? But here's the thing. A lot of these supplements, the only stuff we look at is stuff that's cheap, because we know most supplements don't make enough of a difference to make a difference, if they matter at all. So what we're generally looking for is our good budget-related supplements that we know have some small effect. And all of these are going to be based around your diet. I don't even take vitamin D right now, by the way. It's summertime. I live in Texas. I'm not worried about it. I'll probably go back on vitamin D in the winter, but I start looking at stuff like the number of eggs and things that I eat. I get plenty of vitamin D. Arguably, I get enough creatine from my diet, but I still take it because it's cheap and it seems to work for a lot of people. The magnesium is based on my own diet. I'm ensuring I get enough magnesium because of the potential benefits. It's cheap. And because of the nature of my keto diet, I may not be getting enough magnesium for optimum performance. So it's fine from a health perspective. Let's come over to the fish oil then. All right. Fish oil in small amounts doesn't seem to be harmful, and there may be some benefits. We know that the heart disease is iffy, right? We know it's iffy. It's questionable at this point. But it does seem to have some properties that could help with inflammation. If it seems to potentially help with your connective tissue inflammation, then that's of use to a lifter. Because recovery is everything. Controlling inflammation is a pretty big deal in terms of training. And I don't mean to the point of blocking all inflammation. because cortisol isn't bad, inflammation isn't bad. It just has to be managed. And if the anti-inflammatory properties of the fish oil seem to help with your tendons and seems to help with your training inflammation, it's relatively inexpensive, then by all means, go ahead and use it. I don't see an issue there with something like that. But those are things you could play by ear. I mean, it comes down to what you're willing to spend on supplements, what your budgets are, and what the potential benefits of each one are. And I'd say that one's perfectly fine. I don't see any issue with it. It's just that some of the other health benefits have absolutely come into question. All right, guys, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.